All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This is gonna be the last educational session for today. Really exciting topic, kind of a hot one, in my opinion, about sustainability and consumerism and a brand's role and responsibility. My name is Camille. I am the co-founder and creative director of FABSCRAP. And I have to say that in providing this recycling service to brands, this is kind of a topic that we touch on quite a bit, of a brand's accountability and what exactly does that mean and what does that look like. And I think a lot of you are very well aware with a lot of greenwashing that's happening, because a lot of people feel like they need to say something when they don't actually know the right way to go about the doing part. And so these lovely ladies who I've actually encountered from my experience at FABSCRAP, each have a different way of touching on that and kind of guiding people towards the right and honest reflection of that, so that we avoid a lot of the greenwashing that's happening. So I'm here today with Dr. Cindy Lin from Hey Social Good, with Jessica Kelly from Thr3efold, and Ashleigh Dawson from Recycle2Riches. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I think you have so much to say, having worked with you guys personally, and so I'm really excited to have you here. If each of you would just introduce yourself, tell a little bit about how you even got to where you are, how you got to this stage. Yeah, I'd like to start with you, Cindy.
Hi everybody, thank you for being here. My name is Cindy Lin. I am the co-founder and CEO of Hey Social Good. We are a social impact data company, and our company, Hey Social Good, assess and verify the exhibitors that you guys have visited here today. And we verify the 30 exhibitors who actually meet multiple criteria under the UN Sustainable Development Goals right behind you, and also these mannequins. How did I get here? I used to work at the US Environmental Protection Agency. I was a regulator, I was a scientist, and I realized that there's a lot more exciting possibilities and change that's happening in the private sector. Hard, but it is happening, and people are making phenomenal choices. So that's why I'm where we are.
I'm Jessica Kelly.
Now is it on? We're good? I'm Jessica Kelly. I'm the founder and CEO of Thr3efold. We've spent the last several years training fashion brand teams on sustainability, connecting them to ethical factories, which is quite a feat in and of itself. But we are actually shifting a bit as the world has just changed, and we are going to be launching a YouTube series where we're going to be teaching consumers how to shop, and then taking them behind the scenes of garment factories, mills, all these different suppliers, and actually meeting the people and showing them why it matters, why it's made and how it's made. And in turn, helping brands communicate without greenwashing, the initiatives they're doing, trying to bridge that gap that's so wide between brands and their consumers. So I'm trying to make that easier.
Hi, I'm Ashleigh Dawson. I'm the CEO and president of Recycle2Riches. It's a nonprofit based in Los Angeles, and we are changing the culture of consumption. So we do this through communication, collaboration, and community education. And we find the solutions for a circular economy, and we bring them to the conscious consumers.
Excellent, thank you so much. So I do want to be mindful of the audience and just kind of redefine some of the terms that I think we kind of breathe in day in and day out, and so we kind of forget sometimes to break them down. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, Jessica, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving your definition of what greenwashing is in respect to fashion.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a super loaded question, so thanks for firing that one out. It's similar to like sustainability. It's like, what is it? You know, it's like, well, this is sustainable, we're doing something good. That's not sustainable, that's not good enough. And so it really gets argued around a lot. Greenwashing has a similar effect. So, I mean, more or less, greenwashing is a brand talking about something good they're doing while, you know, behind this curtain, this fun curtain, they have like this mass amount of problems that they're pretending to not have and not addressing. And I think a large part of that is even because they're just not actually talking about their sustainability initiatives in a way that's holistic and journey-minded. And so consumers only see this really lazy little sticker that gets stuck on a label. And so, you know, in the fun inclusive cancel culture world that we all live in today. It's you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So greenwashing is, I would say, brands' number one fear, and what probably keeps them from entering that space.
And Cindy, in one of your recent talks, you kind of defined a couple newer terms, green shushing and green lashing. So if you could also just kind of add to it, Jessica's definition was of greenwashing.
Yeah, it's. I think it's really great. You end on the cancel culture. So there is the green hushing, and that's where businesses are really afraid of being canceled, or being seen in a negative light, because they talk about sustainability and then there's a misunderstanding of like the complexities of it. So they just rather not say anything. So they just go ahead and work on whatever that practice is, whether it's social or environmentally focused, and they don't tell anybody. The negative of that means that there's no good example setter to show that actually you can have a business and work on sustainability. Green lashing is really new, and that's coming about because in the EU, European Union, they're actually coming out with so much different with green initiatives, so accountability, new laws where you have to show traceability, accountability in many different ways. And there's kind of a little bit of an uproar, I think, from some of potential, specifically the small farmers and small businesses who are like, we don't know how we're going to do that. So now there's a backlash against this green initiative. And what's happening in the EU is they're doing a green pause. The word green is everywhere. But yeah, so a lot around, these terms are being thrown around, but you can kind of see the progression of movement on what sustainability ultimately means.
Awesome, thank you guys. Ashleigh, I'd love to hear from you because you work so much with consumers, and I'm sure being on the receiving end of all of these terms and all of these things that are being flashed at them could be an interesting experience. So I guess as a consumer, what would you think are the best ways to combat greenwashing?
Ask questions, be curious. Talk to the brands, learn about them, learn where their manufacturing company is, learn about the brands. That's the number one thing that consumers can do, is be curious about what you're consuming. And if you learn about the brand, and you can see on the site, it's public facing information about their sustainability platform, transparency page. If you see these things on their website, they're loud and proud about it. They're not getting green hushed, they're not getting shut down about it. So I think these are very important things for consumers to keep an eye out on, and ask questions. If you don't know what's in the materials, go ask them. This is going to help the brands transition as well, because if the consumers are asking more questions about their products, they're going to have to answer them. And if they're not doing the right thing, they're probably not going to answer you. If they are doing the right thing, they're going to respond and be excited to tell you what they're doing for their sustainability journey.
Awesome, thank you. That actually segues really well into a question I have for Cindy, because you do so much work with brands to verify some of these steps that you're talking about that should be very transparent. So I'd love to just have your thoughts, Cindy, on what should brands look for when they're considering suppliers, and they're trying to work on these sustainable practices, and when they're in that process before they even get to that point of communicating what they're doing. What are some things they should look for?
I think for your brand, to both what you said, the asking questions, sometimes it's hard to know what questions to ask though, right? If you don't know, you're asking, I don't know, are you sustainable? And then you get answers. What I would say is, it's also hard because there's a lot of certification. So it's just very complex. I think if you see a certification, ask them what it means. Ask them what they do as kind of a guide. The other thing is, I would have brands ask suppliers, very the basic things, what are the practices that you're working on, right? You don't have to know anything, but if, kind of like what Ashleigh said is, if they say they're sustainable, then ask them how are you being sustainable? And if they give you very detailed descriptions, that's helpful, right? It makes you understand what they're doing. That's what we do. So like at Hey Social Good, we go beyond asking questions. What we do is we capture all information about them publicly available. We go to all the certifications to see if they say they have a certification, do they have it? Then we corroborate with whatever they tell us in documentation, and we try to see, is there good evidence for what they're doing? We're looking for the evidence, but I think as just an everyday person, you can do kind of similar in the sense that you understand when someone's being authentic, like when they're telling you something that is meaningful in your ear. What I would say is don't worry about the surge or the complexity, but if there is a practice you understand, so like something that everybody understands is fair worker treatment. That's okay, well, if they say that, how do you do that? Are you paying fair wages? How do you know what's a fair wage? If it's on something that's environmentally focused, like, oh, we're very sustainable because, you know, our factories are energy efficient. Like, oh, okay, how do you do that? Oh, we install solar panels, or like, and if they breeze over it, then you know, right? So I think those are ways as a brand to start asking questions. I would definitely point you to talk to the verified exhibitors, because those are the ones who are at this level, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to get verified, and learn from them, like ask them. Because then from then you're like, oh, okay, that's the standard. And then when I go talk to others, then I have a better idea. It's like that knowledge base.
Can I add one thing to that? I'm so sorry. If you go to Recycle2Riches.org, we actually have the life cycle analysis available, public facing, so you can ask those questions to brand owners. If you're trying to buy them from like wholesale, you can ask those questions. And it's a 5-point sustainability. So it starts with manufacturing and then it goes all the way to end of life. So that way you're able to ask those transparency questions on your own time.
As you were saying, the certifications, verification process, basically all the steps of trying to actually implement sustainable practices, that is not easy, because if it was, we wouldn't really be sitting here talking about greenwashing, right? Because everyone would just be doing it. So Jessica, I'd love to hear from you on the challenges that brands or suppliers face, and maybe more specifically, things that they could be doing that in your experience with working from them, you see are kind of missed opportunities in that journey. Just would love to hear that real honest like confrontation of what are these things that are so hard to implement and talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. So first and foremost, you want to beat every brand and how they're talking about their sustainability, because very few are doing this, is being honest that you're not perfect. So most brands either don't talk about it at all because they don't want to be canceled, or they'll talk about one thing here or there, but very few. I've seen one brand do this that I love the way they did it. Ghani had a post that went viral that was like, we are not sustainable and here's why. And then like you kept going through the carousel, and then the end of it was like, here's what we're working on to make that better. And I think most brands are so scared to actually admit all the things they're not doing right. And that, but we're in an age where that authenticity rings so much truer than our self-applause and like, here's all the great things we're doing that seems so fake. So I think that's step one. Step two is actually bring your customer behind the scenes. They have no idea the million decisions that you make on this floor to figure out what that one tiny project that you put on this label took. So they have no idea. So let them in on that. Like, let them be smarter than just a little label, right? Like, actually bring them in the process. Show videos of your suppliers and let them meet, I don't know, Anna, who works in the factory. Like, bring that in and pepper it in through your website, your signage in store, on tags, in your social media. If you're doing a sustainability report, like we were talking about earlier, brands do these big 100-page sustainability reports and then they never touch it. Why spend that much money and effort? Those things take like months to do. And then it never goes on their social. It's buried in their website. You should use that as free content, like duplicate the hell out of that, put that everywhere. And then I think the other thing is, gosh, I like just so lost my train of thought. Is I think it's bringing the customer along on that conversation, so that then they actually see the journey. They actually see how hard it is. you can take a 7-second video and say, here's, we're talking about this thread and the chemical waste that it has, and then you can zoom out and just kind of let it be known, like there's how many threads are on this garment and how many other pieces go into that component, and be willing to talk about it's a journey and we're not perfect, but we're committed to continuing that.
I was just gonna say the story building part is really important. To your point, it's the content, but like, pulling the curtain back and showing people, I think people love that. People love seeing like, oh, okay. And the thing that other people don't realize, now you're educating, to your point, all the different points and decisions. And I think as a customer myself, right, I'm like, oh, I wanna know. I see, you're trying, but it's not working. And now you're trying this other thing, oh, it's not working. But I'm along that journey with you, and I'm like, I didn't realize how hard it was. Okay, now I see, I'm not gonna cancel you for that.
Yeah, but that fear of the green lashing is so real, and I think that's why brands, are so hesitant unless they have that story ready to go and PR approved and tied up with a bow to send out. They're not going to send anything out. And I experienced that too with FABSCRAP, because we have brands that have signed up for our service, but they purposefully want to be anonymous. And it blows my mind because FABSCRAP is so meticulous about data, and that's the best part of our service, is that unlike paper and cardboard recycling, we give a report telling them the exact amount they've saved from landfill, what that means in terms of trees planted, what that means in terms of CO2 offset. It's formatted, I think, in a really nice graphic designed way, and is super easy to share, but these brands are really, really hesitant to fire it off because of all of the things that they might have to deal with that they're unprepared to talk about. So Ashleigh, another question I had for you was really just, in your opinion, how do you think a brand can provide transparency authentically to their customers?
And I think this goes exactly on your points as well. Telling the story, peeling that curtain back, being very transparent, there goes that word again, of what's happening, explaining your transparency story and your sustainability story and just the efforts that you're trying. So don't be shy. Don't be shy to say what you're trying, what you're attempting, what you're planning on doing. And it's just about explaining the steps that you're working on, and that your team's working on. So I totally agree with you guys. That's the biggest thing, is trying to explain your story in a true, authentic way, where you're not lying, you're not showing a false production house that's not really happening. You're really going in there and you have true stories about the process that it takes to create one garment.
I would actually add to that too, is especially the bigger a brand gets, is often we have the people who know all the things and they're doing all the things, and then the marketing people who know none of those things, and they have to be the ones talking about it. That's the problem. So it's the bigger the brand gets, you have to realize your silos and actually start bringing the marketing people in on the sustainability training and all the decisions that team makes day to day, send them to the factories, let them understand. That's what we're working on with Threefold, is trying to be boots on the ground for brands, where we can capture that photo, that video, those magical stories that every brand, I promise you, every brand is sitting on a gold mine of humanized sustainability, of understanding those stories, but you don't have time for it because you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, trying to make your margins, you're in deadlines for your shipping. So I think the missing piece maybe internally is marketing to production. And my goodness, I've spent the last 7 years learning about sustainability. I'll go over and talk to one of our factories and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing this. And I'm like, what was that word? Yeah. The production's so complicated. So it's we need to learn internally and then also be educating externally, and that's a lot. It's a lot to take on.
I just want to add that it's so true. Yeah. As someone who, previously mostly worked in government and stuff, when I came into this space, I thought, good data means that power for you, right? And oftentimes the question is well, we don't know where that sits. We don't know where funding for that comes. And it is the marketing that there does seem to be a disconnect between the people who are marketing, but it's not that they don't want to, it's the timing.
They really want to.
They really want to, but they don't have time to learn from the production or learn about all those details, and that does take time. And so then what ends up happening is the marketing person's like, well, I need to put these things out or post or whatever, or videos, and they did it because that's their job, and then something comes back and they're like, well, I didn't know. It just seems so sad to me because I feel like everybody's trying to do the right thing, but because of miscommunication or not just spending a little bit extra time on just educating or something, communication, then you get this cancel culture that we've developed.
Well, yeah, all the departments within a typical fashion house are pretty segmented. And it's funny because, yeah, we'll have design and production aware and participating in the FABSCRAP service because they're the ones physically putting the fabrics in our recycling bags. But then, you know, they'll still reach out to us for education for their entire team because, you know, someone from the marketing department sees these FABSCRAP bags, they don't know what they are, but they see them in the office and they, you know, they kind of grow and accumulate and whatever,
and
but then they disappear and they don't really know what that partnership is. And, you know, it's just, if there was a little bit more communication internally, and I guess imagine a world in which everyone is really in tune with what each other is doing, I do think that there could be a little bit more progress, or at least a little bit less hurdles. So I'm just really curious, Jessica, if you think this fear of greenwashing has made it harder for progress in sustainability in general.
So I love that you asked that because I actually posed that question on my LinkedIn semi-recently. 80%, so I said, do you feel like this cancel culture and this greenwashing backlash that brands get is keeping brands from even entering the space? 80% of people said yes. And like most of the people I'm connected to are industry professionals. And I know that, but that was a good quantitative number. I was like, wow, because I have literally talked to like leading brands in our like top fashion week showing brands that like have directors of sustainability, they're doing a bunch and they're like, oh no, we don't talk about that. So like, I can't even tell you, like, you know, so it's like the unwillingness because they can't, because here's the thing, they get canceled, the orders go down, those suppliers have to lay off people, now they're responsible for livelihoods that now can no longer send their children to school and feed their children. So it's like, instead of canceling, we have to step up. We can't just keep canceling relationships. We can't just stay divided like this, because that's the trickle-down effect of that is families not being cared for. And that's, I think, the thing that out of enraged passion we're missing and hurting, being, you know, accidentally hurting, is like not letting people actually grow. We need to grow. So do brands. So do our suppliers. Everybody.
I just want to add to, earlier you said there was that one brand that had this, you know, kind of post that went viral about how we are not sustainable. You know, one of the gold standards in this space is Patagonia. Like, everybody speaks to Patagonia. Last year, they made a huge announcement and said, we are not a sustainable company. And I think the reason is in response to this whole green washing, green lashing, green hushing, which is this idea of we're worried about what it means. And I love that you brought up the fact that it has all these domino effects that people don't realize. Like, it comes from a good heart of like, oh, I think they're doing something bad, even though they say something good. So I'm not gonna buy from them. But what I think most people don't realize is all that, literally that tens of thousands of decision points a supplier has to make and a brand has to make. So I can't tell you, like, you know what, the reason we actually decided to go with this rubber, even though we know it's bad, is because we made a decision to go with this renewable fiber, which costs a little bit more. But how do you explain that? And to your point, like, if we could bring more of that storytelling out, it would be really, really helpful, and also educate our public.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the danger of the cancel culture, is that it kind of prevents and limits the amount of awareness that could be shared. Because if people kind of just ask for questions rather than like immediately jumping to these criticisms, then there would be more conversation, I think more collaboration in general. But it's interesting because, you know, a lot of this hesitation is from the threat of this backlash and whatnot, and kind of like the reactions of people. But I think where we're heading is that there's a lot of legislation that's coming down. And I don't think that you could be afraid anymore of just what people will say. I think you literally will be accountable legally, hopefully, if things pass and go forward. And so, Cindy, I'd love for you to kind of dive into that and catch us all up to speed on what are some of the legislation and some of the policies that are being discussed and really fought for.
So many, and I know Jessica definitely can jump in, but I would say, that's ours, but right now there's probably around, 18 to 20 pieces of legislation happening globally in the US and also in the European Union. I think the European Union is always just a little bit ahead of us. They have decided to do, there's a lot of names for it, but in general it's this green initiative, asking for accountability for carbon offset measurements, asking for accountability for material traceability, asking for accountability for if you're talking about toxic pollutant list, right? And that is a whole massive influence, and to show reports. Here in the US, we have all kinds of things happening both on both coasts, in California and New York. In New York, there's the proposed New York Fashion Sustainability Act, in addition to the Fabric Act, in addition to the Garment Workers Act. That's all happening at the same time. California has decided that we need more accountability and basically of just what companies are saying. So that all of that is coming down in many different ways. Fashion, in addition to just materials production. And then nationally, real quick, I'm just running through all of them, but there is the Securities Exchange Commission has just announced new policies and the rule coming down, which is that if you're a company or a business over making so much revenue per year, you actually have to now produce a report, accountability report, if you talk about anything around environmental, social, or governance, or carbon offset. So all of these things are hanging in a thread. Lots of businesses are kind of afraid and freaking out. And I always say, as someone who used to work in policy, please don't freak out. It just means that is the future. And if you can be the one to take the step forward, you're gonna win. You're gonna have the advantage because everyone else is just like, we'll wait and see what happens. Meanwhile, things are happening. So I think it's actually an opportunity to be ahead of the game.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Jessica, to that?
I think it's in taking one step at a time, because this is coming, and if it's starting in Europe, it's a matter of time before it comes here. And so I think it's like, what can we do in each area that our hands are in to be addressing those initiatives, learning, our team learning more, and then how do we talk about that more transparently and more often, more frequently to our customers, bringing that story in so it's relatable. What we were talking about earlier is like, your customer doesn't care you're counting carbon, sorry, but if you can turn that, it's like, that's not sexy. If you can turn that into the physical impact that it has for the people that are making the actual clothes at your actual factories, a customer understands that because they're a single mother, she's a single mother, or they have, that's somebody you can think of, it's your aunt or your uncle or whatever, so it's like when you can really dial it down, and this takes intentionality, this takes you to pause, makes you pause and actually have to think about this. So it's like, instead of jumping on the latest trend right now, by the way, is circularity. In 2 years, we'll move on to something else. So instead of jumping on the latest trend of sustainability, because we all have trends in every industry, no matter what we do, take that pause to go, okay, if we do this initiative, what is the actual human impact? Because that's the thing that your customers are going to resonate with. That's the thing that they will champion behind. The reason Tom's was the first brand to really start making this movement happen is because they introduced an entire generation of the fact that there were children without shoes. And they were like, well, I want kids to wear shoes. And then everyone did. So it was like, and then there was long-term repercussions they had to figure out, like, oh, we decimated the shoe industry in this country. Let's figure that out. So, and then that's the thing, it's like, nobody's perfect, and even the best intentions, you can't see with success what that might look like. But don't do nothing, because then we're gonna continue to have this conversation year after year after year with what? I'm not interested in that.
And I just want to interject, I want to bring it back to this carbon emissions and carbon impact discussion, which I'm in 100% agreement with you, and someone who actually used to calculate that a lot. What's hard about it is not that it's not good. it's really important to do that computation and calculation to kind of do your homework. What's hard is that when you tell your customer you need to reduce your carbon footprint by 500 pounds, they're not going to know what it means. And they're going to say like, yeah, I'm going to go to school. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just, and that was something I learned, you know, before. I used to constantly tell my mom like, hey, can you just drive less, it's bad, here are the reasons, here's the data. And she never responded until finally I told her the story of like, Mom, did you know that if you actually just drove 1 day less or 2 days less, you could reduce the asthma risk for children? She was like, oh, yes, I'll carpool more, right? So I think going back to story building, if I told her, and I did, I was like, you just need to do it by so many pounds. Like, no one understands that. And I don't know that people should. Like, no one should be expected to be an expert, because most people didn't go to school for it. But you should speak to the specific practice, right? Like that we all understand, oh, okay, they decided to eliminate toxics and use plant-based diets. I understand that. They decided, it's kind of like the food movement, right? They decided to actually pay a fair wage. I understand what that means, and I think that's where people need to focus on.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to kind of what I was a little afraid to ask, which is, you know, if you are complying with legislation, if you are doing all the right things, do the customers even know what that means? Like, even right now, we're having to constantly define green lashing, green shushing, whatever the terms are right now. And so, Ashleigh, I'd love to hear from you, just from, I don't know, all the interactions you have with like making these suggestions to customers. Like, what do you feel like is their awareness of end of life? Like, do they even know what that means? Do they even know about like post-consumer waste? Like, how aware are they to where if you do all of these things and you are successful and perfect at doing it all, like, is it even going to land with the customer?
It's not going to land with everyone because they will have more questions, obviously. But I know that the ones that are interested in it, they are the ones that want to know more if they don't know yet. So the consumer is the one that they can take everything in, they can understand it, right? But if they don't know the background of it, they're not going to understand anything you just put out in your sustainability report at the end of the year. So, like we go back to saying, it is telling that journey all the way through and explaining it very clearly, and having definitions on your website, having a definition of what greenwashing even means, or sustainability, or transparency, whatever that is, you need to define it for your consumer. And how you define it in particular, because it's always a very particular way that business is going to explain their sustainability story. It's not going to be the same thing for everyone. So I know for a fact that consumers are getting very educated on their own, and I love that. And I know that since I started Recycle the Riches back in 2024, from all the way from now, it's a big transition. I can say greenwashing and people know what I'm saying. I can say upcycling and they understand. So it's getting there. The understanding of this industry is definitely getting there. But all the work needs explanation still.
Definitely. And so I'm going to put you guys a little bit on the spot. And I really want to know, especially because you guys each have such different backgrounds, which things you think need definition, that need focus, that need extra explanation, or maybe they don't need extra explanation, but they need some. Like, at least from where I sit at FABSCRAP, because we deal in commercial waste, as an example, I constantly have to remind people there is a difference in textile waste. You have the residential waste, which everyone knows because we all participate in that. It's when the clothes don't fit anymore, there are holes, whatever it may be, you're clearing out your closet, residential waste. But then there's commercial waste, which is all the things that are happening behind the scenes, those headers, the cuttings, the yardage even, which is the most sad to me. But having to tell them that there is a difference, and the difference is important because they separately each have volumes that are significant. So when I try to tell people, yeah, textile waste is bad and it adds to climate change, having to define that is an example in my world that I constantly have to do. So I'd love to hear from each of you guys what you think is important to furthering that understanding with consumers and having it really click for them. And I know we've already brought up some topics, but if you would want to choose one and go into more specifics.
I would choose the term sustainability and vegan, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's okay to say you're sustainable, but I think there needs to be a follow-up of what does it mean when you're sustainable? Because it could be also be I'm providing fair wages, but it could also mean that I'm reducing water waste or less water use. It's just really complex, and it's okay because we live in a complex world and it's hard. So I would say we need to redefine, we don't need to redefine sustainability. We should bring sustainability back to where it was before, which is it's just a generic term, right? But we need to go and find what those specific practices. I mentioned, sorry, I'm gonna add vegan because recently I feel like, I have been talking about microplastics for a long time with the people around me, with other scientists, and we're really, really worried about microplastics. And finally, there's like evidence of it's in our body on a daily basis, and there's lots of evidence that. But the vegan, specifically leather, is essentially just plastic. So can we redefine what that means, and we can redefine what these terms mean for all of us?
That's a good one. I think for me, it's defining the human impact. We've now been just harping and are continue to do so on that humanizing the sustainability thing, and I think it's because there's a very direct correlation. The more deep, scientific, harder the initiative becomes, the less people are going to relate to it. And people are busy, so it's like the more that becomes harder and deep and scientific and nerdy, the more time that you should be spending figuring out the simplest common denominator of the human impact it has, because that's the thing that your customers are going to understand quickly and can support and run with.
Oh, mine would be circularity for sure. So circular production versus linear, circular economy versus linear, that is something that I think everyone should try to redefine, because without explaining this circularity that we're all going for, we're gonna stay on this linear path of take, make, waste. And even when I say that, people are like, what? A linear economy? It's like, no, that's what we're on now. It's take, make, waste, and we're trying to use the waste to make our resources. And so explaining circularity has always been the hardest part of sustainability.
Well, I'd love to open it up to questions that you guys might have in the audience, but before I do that, I'm going to jump the line and ask one more question, which I think is one of the more difficult in terms of consumers and where they sit, but also brands and that bottom line that they're trying to hit. How do you talk to your consumers and explain the pricing and the cost that comes with sustainability? And that could be an open interpretation of cost, but I think a lot of consumers need to understand why everything can't be $5 and less, and I think that they are somewhat open to that justification of why, but I guess in what I would think is a more difficult conversation of having to say when people are, really, not everyone is in that place where they can have a lot of, expendable income. How would you go about that part of the conversation, especially when, money's tight?
I just want to touch on that really quick. I always like to make my customer or the person that's speaking to me feel validated. So if they cannot afford sustainable fashion, which we all know is a bit more expensive, which it should be because it costs a lot to do, I always explain to them the ways that they could be still sustainable in their fashion without having to invest into a sustainable fashion brand, like thrifting or giving them more suggestions, not just trying to make them feel like they can't afford it, right? But also, when they're asking those questions of why is it this much, again, I love going back and telling them the story of why it is so much. We went to Bangladesh, we saw the factories, we went to the makers. That cost so much money to go there. We came back with the materials. Like, you can't get that product for $5 shipped to the United States for $5. It doesn't even cost $5. It costs $1,000 to even get it here. You know, so it's really putting it into perspective and showing them the life cycle of that product. And because it's so hidden, the humans behind these products are so hidden, that if we can show the humans behind the products, they'll understand why they're getting that much, you know, so that's one way.
Yeah, and I think Everlane's set a really good precedent for this. Every single product detail page has the breakdown of the cost. And that's, I think, a really easy illustration of what that is. And then when the pricing has to change, because we're living in a day and age of supreme distrust in organizations. We don't trust the government, we don't trust media, we don't trust companies. So I think the immediate thought a customer is going to see when a price goes up is, oh, well, they just want to get paid more. And so when you can put a banner that doesn't even go anywhere on your entire website that's like, just letting you know our cost is going up a little bit because we're deciding to pay our workers more because their costs have gone up and we don't want them to suffer. Every customer is going to understand that. But when you don't address it, you're like, oh, they'll just know, or you're too afraid to confront that thought. Their immediate reaction is going to be, they don't trust you. So just putting it out there, just taking the millisecond to have that there for them to see and understand is going to allow them to go, oh yeah, I get that. Because they're seeing the cost of everything in their life go up. So rather than pushing on that bruise more, they're going to, I think, be able to track back to where that goes being more expensive too.
Well, everything they said. One last thing I probably would add is just, I think everyone values quality. So I don't know anyone who will just take like cars or electronics. People will spend money whether they can or cannot have it. They'll save it because they know if I buy the better, AirPod or headphones or smartwatch or smartphones or a Tesla versus that, oh, these are all these benefits. It's cool, it's value, and I get to do all these different things. And I think that's the story building too, is like, I think that as consumers, we need to understand when I buy a pair of jeans that's $130, sometimes I don't think about those things, but if I think about the quality and that it can last, 10 years and I don't have to throw it away and then I can resell it to a vintage market, it's like I'm making money. So I think a lot of those of the quality of the product always wins out. To your point, Everlane, that's what they do. And a lot of these companies, lots of people go buy Patagonia jackets. They're not cheap either. And I think it's building it into who you are, the DNA of your brand.
Awesome, thank you guys. Are there any questions out in the audience? Any thoughts or reflections from some of the things that we've been touching on, which are quite a lot? I feel like this has been a very productive talk. Yes.
In the EU, they're ahead of us. Yes. And I believe that they can make that change, legislate change, and so on. But how realistic is it in the United States for legislation that we discussed to actually be enacted, passed? What's the reality?
That's a really great question. I think any legislation and policy in the United States go through a lot of work. Someone who spent 2 months one time on one paragraph. But I would say that parts of it are real. Sometimes government will put out a policy or potential policy to see how businesses respond. I would say as a business, you should, and I said it earlier, you should take advantage of and it doesn't really matter whether it comes or not, because you actually have to do it for your business. Because at some point, in a time of less resources, more costs and all kinds of things, right? Nearshoring versus offshoring, those are real business questions. You have to make the better decision point for your bottom line, but also for your branding. So absolutely the legislation will come. I don't know in what form, how long it will be, but there will be legislation because there is a lot of other things that they have to consider in terms of not just pollution, but impacting other businesses. Security basically for US-based businesses, right? To make sure that US-based businesses are also competitive. There's another reason why some of these are coming down the pipe. It's not just because like, oh, we want to ratchet down. It's actually to provide security and ensuring that US-based businesses can be competitive, right? When you compare to offshore. So there's a lot of those considerations, and I think that half of those are going to come to fruition. I'm not sure which half. The SEC one, that's already in play. California, those are already up here. The New York Fashion Sustainability Act likely will come. It's already halfway through the process.
You guys had mentioned, and I believe this too, the sustainable or sustainability is a very generic term. What would you guys, if you were to rebrand sustainability essentially, what word would you guys use and versus what's being used? I think it's overused.
Yeah, very much so. I would probably use inclusivity, being inclusive. I think I would call it that because you're including every point of your supply chain and you're explaining it. Yeah.
I think I'd use the word conscious because I think it's mindful. It's it's considering all the points. But I do think and you can look at the past with how much our language gets reappropriated consistently every year now these days. I think any word that you use eventually coined to try and do something eventually gets overused and then has the same problem. So I don't even think necessarily, yes, it's annoying, but I think rebranding the word will just eventually 10 years down the road, conscious would be that, right? So, I think there's not, unfortunately, a solution to that. I don't think, because I think when we're all brands, we all have our personal brand, we all have our actual company we work for, we have all these things, and it's like we're in a day and age where we're so hyper aware of communication and branding that everything does get branded, and then that becomes kind of washed out at some point. So I don't know. I would say go with conscious, but I think it would end up having the same end as sustainability.
Yeah, I remember way back when people used the word eco-friendly, and now no one uses it because it's, I don't know why, but it doesn't seem like it's good anymore, which is funny. I'm like, I still understand what it means. I would say I agree with everything you guys said, but especially Jessica, totally, so every word. But personally, and I'm not just saying this, but I would use social good because I want to highlight the 17 SDGs. At some point, we still need some kind of foundation. We still need some kind of framework to work with. We can't ignore the work that the United Nations, they spent years coming up with those 17 sustainable development goals that cover everything within people and planet. And it's actually the interconnections between people and planet. So if I had to choose one today and I get to set a trend, I would use social good.
I would have to say accountability or responsibility, because really the situation that we're in right now, like, we did that. That was our fault. We made all those decisions. We didn't have the right foresight or long-term thinking to really think through how this affects all of our resources long-term. And yeah, when it comes to the people behind all of the things we decide, we are responsible for each other. All the things that you guys have mentioned, and how unfortunate it is that other people, how unfair it is, of how unequal it is, like, we decided that. So I think, to me, it's that. But like you were saying, in another 10 years, that would probably be out of fashion and we'd be having the same conversation.
So there you go. It's inclusivity, conscious, social good, responsibility. Those are the new terms.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you. Anyone who wasn't maybe brave enough to announce their question out loud, feel free to come up, say hi to our excellent panelists. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to invite everybody at 5 o'clock. We're going to celebrate 20 years of sourcing in the Source